Randolph, we're here at the De La Voix Pavilion in Bexhill to talk about your radar commission, Black Salt. Before we get into the detail of the music and how you composed it, can you tell me about how you felt when you actually received the commission and what led you to actually come up with this composition?
In the period that we're actually in, there's a lot of different things that are kind of thrown at you that you can apply for, go for funding, for support. And funny enough, I didn't feel compelled to go with that. I just was trying to find my way in terms of where am I taking this next in terms of music in this situation that we've got. And when I saw the commission come up, it kind of just had everything written on it about, one, where I lived, two, something which I felt like I could find an inspiring topic for me.
Because you live in Folkestone.
Yeah, because I live in Folkestone, and it just felt like it had a lot of, regionally, it had a sort of added reference for me to actually apply something to it. So I kind of went for it, and I was really quite amazed how quickly everything just came together when I actually applied, and I let it go. But I really felt confident about it. For some apparent reason, I felt really confident about it, and then I got the commission came through, and I was elated. I was absolutely elated because it just gave me an opportunity to tell a story that I've wanted to tell.
So this has been on your mind for a while then?
The story kind of turned up after I had done a other piece about Walter Toll. So since moving out to Folkestone, I really felt like the history of the areas that I was living in became a really important part of my quest. I think it was about black representation, seeing somebody who looks like me in this area, knowing that there has been so many people who have passed through Folkestone as an area, coastal town, and I live near the sea, and there's stories which are written on the sea that I just feel are tangible to me, but I just didn't see it. And then the stories of, obviously, the World War came up for me, and then I started to look at, well, that's land. What about the sea? You know, I can see ships all the time. Who's on these ships? You know, there's people who look like me on these ships. There's people who have worked on these ships. And that's what kind of got me infused to seek to find out more.
So we're dealing with black sailors,
Yeah.
we're dealing with black maritime history, which is obviously very important when you think about where we are in the African diaspora, the Atlantic, all of those crosses in very different circumstances. You've referred to the military history as well, the contribution of black people to the Navy, to the armed services. I mean, this is a very, very important subject. The historical and political magnitude of this is enormous. And you came up with the title Black Salt, and that has a specific meaning, doesn't it?
Well, black salt in kind of old English naval terms, an old salt is somebody who's had experience of being on the sea. And so they're kind of looked up to as kind of like, almost like the storytellers, the sort of, they have the stories of being on the sea, and the experience of seeing things in front of them and going, well, it's all right, you know, watch that cloud, you know, it's all right. So you had an old salt, which was a reference, I think that Nelson had made as well to the people who had supported him in his victories and his pursuits in battle. And the spin on it was actually from a naval picture as well of Lord Nelson's last moments. Or you can see that there is a black sailor in the picture. If you don't look properly, you might not visually see that. Oh my gosh, that's representation of me in it. So yeah, it was just that kind of spin on on the word black salt, as in black of salt, somebody who's been on the sea as well.
So you have a rich historical framework. How did you then go about developing the composition, particularly the lyrics?
So I took some of the sort of historic stories of people who were on seas or born on the seas, and of course we know, you know, we've had the picture of kind of slave boats, but as well we had the picture of trading taking place.
You got the merchant navy.
The merchant navy, which, you know, up to the sort of 1980s, there was a big merchant navy ship that must have had about 3,000 people from either half from Nigeria who were working on these ships, and Sierra Leone as they were trading between the West and East. And Ignatius Sancho came up because he was actually born on a ship as a baby, and that picture just became a real symbolic thing for me, you know, sort of being born on the sea. Yeah, I kind of wanted to see if I can find a way of hearing their voices alongside these common sea shanties that you would have heard being played. And that's what made me really think, which is like, well, if they're on the ships and they're working on the ships and there's musicians on the ships, what would they have felt and what would they have been bringing at the same time to these songs, in terms of rhythm, in terms of melodic texture, tonality, even just the pentatonic scale. You know, we have to consider where that would have brought them as well. So that started my senses thinking musically what it was. But I started with a sea shanty first and just saw how I can elaborate on what's there.
Because the sea shanty is a generic term. It's really interesting. We just think of songs that are developed, I suppose, as a kind of folk song.
Yeah.
Because we don't think about sea shanties having a composer. They're just sea shanties, and they're folk songs, really.
Yeah.
But if we think about the history of the merchant navy, certainly in the 19th and the early 20th century,
yeah,
then you have a very, very international context where you've got people from around the world coming together. West Africans, people from the Middle East and North Africa, Europeans.
Yeah.
It's very, very diverse.
Yeah.
And I think either consciously or subconsciously, maybe that seeped into the way that you've written this as well, this sense of something being very open stylistically.
Yeah, and I think also there is something to be said about, you know, these folk songs, a folk song being sung by a black person. And that already, for me, there's a sort of juxtaposed feeling off that, you know. Just when I started to sing, because when I look online, I see the traditional kind of guys together sort of doing this, but it's not reflective of anything that relates necessarily to me.
So you mean in the popular imagination,
yeah,
a sea shanty might be Irish or
Yeah.
Scottish or European,
Yeah,
but
for
not
sure.
necessarily African or black.
For sure.
Yeah.
And you know, the textual, the instrumentation on it is built around either accordion, a small accordion, or flute being played, a pipe, for example, or you know, at the most, some form of guitar. So even the moment I sung it for the first time, I was like, oh gosh, there's so much in this. There's so much in this which almost feels like it hasn't been said.
Yeah.
And it's for me to just see in a very open way what that could be.
So let's talk more about the lyrics, Randolph. How did you come up with those opening lines once you'd established that black salt from old salt, that was going to be your theme? How did you then go about developing that?
So I looked at the stories that they generally spoke about in the sea shanties. So it was just almost like just to get the mood of, because we got to remember these were long journeys that these men would take. They'd get on these boats, sometimes being paid absolutely nothing. Sometimes they would have been stolen from the land to be on these boats, and they'd wake up, half drunk and just like, oh my gosh, I'm on a boat and now you're going to work. That's it. That's where you're going to go. So what you get in terms of the feedback loop is some of the feelings of loss, the feelings of the loved ones, the feelings of seeing the person that you love again, or arriving somewhere, and as well the boat. So the stories of almost like incantations for the boat to survive the journey. Steady she goes, we're working together. That charm and adventure is what I was trying to kind of like bring into the piece in terms of two parts. The first part being the journey of a child almost opening its eyes, or being able to have almost like an out-of-body experience, looking at what is in front of him, which is, I've been born on this boat, and I look at the clouds, and for everybody else, the clouds look like them, but they don't look like me. And what I see is the bow and the stern of the boat. This is my environment. And so that's that. In the first part, that's what I'm kind of really wanting to talk about, without knowing what the future is, but actually the future is coming for you as well, based on this situation. Your future is going to unfold in a different way. And then there's an embracing part of the fact that I am this black salt of the sea, that actually I have dreams. I have dreams like anybody else to be on the sea, and those dreams are what I want to express to people. I am that person. I'm the person who has actually been on the sea with the experience, and actually that can become a very proud thing to have. So that's what I'm sort of conveying in two parts in the actual Black Salt piece.
The instrumentation that you chose, piano, flute, voice, something which is quite stripped down but very rich in terms of timbres.
Yeah.
It gives you opportunities to have some really nice harmonies and little counter melodies.
Yes. So I wanted to create something which resembled the ebb and flow, the wash, the drift of the sea, the almost endless cycle that the sea almost in your horizon has, but as well in terms of the current that is there.
The waves that keep
and
rolling.
The waves that go in, but as well the undertone in waves which are happening that you can't hear, but they're like murmurs and rich with the undertone, the beneath stories.
Right.
And so that's kind of what I wanted to create, especially for the first piece. So the voice is almost sailing across this kind of platform of landscape and cycles, just a continuous cycling feeling. And then the second piece is kind of leaning even more into the sort of sea shanty type expression with a repetitive kind of hand clap gesture, which is happening, which can be.
It's almost like a rhythmic work song, isn't it?
Yeah, and again it's that resemble. It's it's in that moment, for example, that hand clap is a clap that you would hear across the world in celebration and in folklore. The hand clap is almost like the moment of rest and people being together.
Yeah. If we relate that to your development as an artist, in the last few years, it feels as if you've been doing more and more improvisation and working with loops, working with a pedal board, doing live sampling of your work. Do you think that this has been an important premise in some way to you doing this kind of composition where you can be very, very creative? Because even when you're performing solo, there's an orchestral element that has come into your work.
One of the things I changed over the last period was I was saying, what's the container of kind of what's evolved with me? It was like at one point I felt more like a songwriter, and now I don't feel like a songwriter in the sort of like generic sense of a songwriter. I feel like a composer. I feel more like I'm writing compositions and I'm arranging pieces of work, and I'm conducting that through one, performance, and through the improvisation. And I wanted this piece to have a very solid nuances, but then the rest of it was going to be really about the moment.
Can we just round off by going back to the composition specifically? Do you think, given the historical context that you've outlined and that you've explained very clearly, that there is possibly an underlying message of solidarity, of community, when you think about sailors being in these confined spaces together at sea, having to work together? And especially if you're talking about multicultural and multiracial crews on a ship, how that strikes a contrast with racial division on land.
There was definitely a difference in it because they had to work together. Like, you know, if you're going to pull a cell, one person couldn't do that. You know, you all had to do it because
it's a joint enterprise.
You knew that your life almost depended on it in terms of the direction, in terms of you getting back home, in terms of you being paid. There was a lot it felt like there was a lot to lose, even though as well we have to still be very open about it, that they were still treated and still being, you know, still underneath the ship. They were still cooks and cleaners. You know, they didn't have the positioning that they could have had.
There's still a certain amount of discrimination within that community.
Yes. And we have to remember that they built these relationships. They built very close relationships on the ships. And ultimately, once they went back onto land, those relationships were dispersed because the land brought a different energy about racism and about discrimination.
Well, that's the huge irony in all of this, because you had serious race riots in this country in the earlier 20th century.
That's right.
Ports where you had black sailors.
Yeah.
In places like Cardiff,
Liverpool. Yeah.
You know, that's that kind of backdrop to all of this is very important.
There was a threat on their arrival. The texture of them being sailors can be have a romantic texture to it, but they were trying to survive. They were trying to find a way.
But Black Salt has a more uplifting, certainly atmosphere to it.
Yeah, for me it is. I mean, I'm stimulated by joy. You know, that's why these stories are not. It's a celebration. It's just like I've found something. It's like finding an uncle. It's like finding a family member that you haven't seen for a long time. You know, when my mum tells me, "Oh my gosh, that's your uncle from," so I feel elated to know that I have even more of a rich palette of the Matthews family closer to me to talk about. And I think for anybody who's trying to make connection, you know, you want to make connection because you feel proud about something. And for me, that has been my journey to take the joy of music as a means to express to people something that we can all find a universal understanding in, and to give it a context of that we can celebrate something, that we know that there's shadow and light to everything in life, and I think in equal measures I want to express both of those sides, because that's where I want it to end as well. I want it to end up with light.